on when we'll get the word for what Billy's gonna do. So even though I'm just on pause right now here waiting for that decision to put out my next video on it, and I'm sure by the time I get this video live, we'll get the breaking news on what Billy Donovan is doing next. But while we wait for that, I thought it would be a good time to discuss what are the Bulls going to do with their current free agents, the 6 guys on their roster that are going to be free agents this summer, not including their two-way guys in Yuki Kawamura, Lachlan Olbrich, and Mac McClung. And I get asked this question surprisingly often from a lot of people that, hey, who do you think the Bulls are going to keep on this team going into next season? In my view, and I've said this before, there's really only one guy that is worth keeping and most likely going to be staying, and I'll get to him in a minute. But because I've talked about free agent targets for the Bulls who are currently not on this team, as well as all the things the Bulls could do with the available cap space they have this summer, let's now instead focus on the guys that are on expiring contracts and discussing their future fit with the Chicago Bulls. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, I think the biggest caveat on all of this, as far as which Bulls free agents would stay on the roster, a lot of it is very much dependent on what the Bulls do in the draft, particularly if they get lucky and move into the top 4. Because if they move into the top 4, regardless whether it falls 1 through 4, you're talking about 3 of those projected top 4 picks are going to be a big. The only one who is not would be Darren Peterson. Debansa, Boozer, Caleb Wilson are all guys that are 6'9 or 6'10. And so it's more likely than not that if the Bulls do move into the top 4, they're going to draft a big. And then, of course, they also have the 15th pick that the Blazers are shipping to us. And when you look at the players that are slated to go in that range, you're also looking at quite a few bigs as well. Hans Steinbach, Thomas Ha, Ade Mara, the guy I'm actually most interested in for the Bulls as their next center for this young core. But then you also have Kareem Lopez, Jaden Quaintance, I think is how you pronounce his last name, Quaintance. But in any event, if the Bulls are going to draft 2 bigs, forwards, or centers, that's really going to dictate who they're more likely to keep among their current free agents. Now, say they don't move into the top 4 and they stick at number 9 or even fall to number 10. I would see a higher likelihood of them drafting a guard, because for that pick, unlike with the 15th pick, the Bulls should be approaching that by taking the best player available and not drafting for need. And in the 9 to 10 range, when you look beyond those projected top 5 picks, you're primarily seeing guards. Darius Acuff, Mikal Brown Jr., Keaton Wagler, Kingston Flemings, Braden Burries. So if the Bulls end up drafting one of those guys with 9 or 10, then that's most likely going to impact the return of, say, guys like Colin Sexton and Anthony Simons. Now, like I mentioned before, the only guy they really should be bringing back, the one that not only makes the most sense from a roster timeline perspective, but is the most favorable contract and has the most upside given his age, is Leonard Miller. Bulls have a team option on the next year of Miller's contract at a bargain $2.4 million. They could either just pick that up and see how he does next season and decide to extend him next summer if he still shows the promise that we saw at the end of this season, or they could decline that team option and try and lock in a longer term deal at a very team-friendly contract. But in my opinion, he really should be the only one returning, and I would argue is most likely the only player the Bulls will actually bring back. But I'll try to put that aside for now and be practical in this approach, because only bringing back Miller and adding in 2 rookies still leaves a lot of open roster spots for this upcoming season. And with the way free agency is in the NBA today, with most players just re-upping with their own teams, the restricted free agents in this class having a high likelihood of just being retained by their current team. So there is a world that, for better or worse, the Bulls will be put in a position where they will have to re-sign more of their guys than just Leonard Miller. So anyway, I'll run through all of these free agents and give a percentage of the likelihood that they'll still be in a Bulls uniform next season. I don't really need to go through Leonard Miller because I think this one is a no-brainer. Bulls will either take that team option or extend him to a longer-term deal. 100% he's staying with the team. Now let's start with Zach Collins. Zach Collins, we've barely been able to see him play. Only played in 10 games this season. We only saw him play 28 games last season with the Bulls after he was part of that Zach LaVine trade. And when Collins has played, he's actually been solid. He's a great screener, was probably the Bulls' best screener when he was available and healthy. Solid rim protector, has good instincts when he's on the court. The problem is he's always had injury issues throughout his career, even before coming to Chicago. He's going to be 29 around the start of the season, so he doesn't really fit the Bulls' timeline. I think the only way Collins stays is if the Bulls can get him on a reasonable contract, somewhere in the low teens range on an annual basis and on a 2-year deal max. Anything longer than that just doesn't make sense when he's going to be entering his 30s. The other thing too is if the Bulls draft 2 bigs, that likely means even less of a chance for Collins to return, as the Bulls just won't have a spot for him in the rotation. So for Zach Collins, I'm giving it a 30% chance that the Bulls re-sign him. Really just depends on how much interest there's going to be with Zach Collins on the open market, and if the Bulls can get him on a cheap enough deal, and also whether they draft guards versus bigs. Now, how about Anthony Simons? You know, it's interesting because Simons kept talking about how he wants to stay in Chicago to the media after the final game of the season, even though I feel like a lot of times players just have to say that. But we only got to see him play in 6 games, not ideal. But I did like what I saw from Simons when he was in Boston, taking on a lesser role, coming off the bench, and was actually solid for them as a scorer in that second unit. Ideally, it would be great to have a veteran guy who can score coming off the bench for a younger, inexperienced team, especially someone who is a high-volume three-point shooter like Simons is. But I'd have to think that if you're going to take that type of guy, meaning an older-ish player that is a reliable scorer that can get you buckets off the bench, but also be a veteran voice in the locker room, Sexton is going to make more sense for you in that scenario because he's probably going to be cheaper. And I think the Bulls, or maybe this is just me hoping anyway, are going to value Collin Sexton's energy and the edge that he plays with as a better backcourt option, whether it be putting him in the starting lineup alongside Giddey or coming off the bench. So for Simons, I'd say it's more in the 10% range of him, a chance of him returning, and honestly, that might kind of be generous at this point. Speaking of Collin Sexton, though, and I've said this before, but he's really the only player outside of Leonard Miller who I could see, if the Bulls aren't getting the free agents they wanted, or the majority of them are just re-signing with their teams, that Sexton could be one of those guys that the Bulls offer an extension to. I mean, the Bulls are going to have to spend money somewhere. Under the new CBA, they have to spend at least 90% of the cap, and the Bulls currently have around $58 million in cap space. So there is a world where they look at a guy like Sexton and say, we like the passion and energy that he brought to this team. We know he's a strong offensive player. He can score in a hurry. Let's try and sign him to a shorter term deal, maybe 2 years, $35 million. It's a little less than what he's making right now. Sorry, I should say 2 years, $30 or $35 million total, so 15 to 17 million or so on an annual basis. But there's no way he's going to get better offers than that on the open market, especially when most of the league doesn't have cap space. So yeah, I could see that scenario playing out. I still think there is a higher chance that Sexton walks, but I'll give it a 45% chance that he returns with the Bulls. To me, the next two are pretty easy. You've got Guerschon Yabusele and Nick Richards. Both guys the Bulls brought in to essentially fill roster spots of need after the trade deadline. They needed centers after moving Vucevic. Yabusele had some nice moments, and I appreciated his energy when he was out on the court, but he just makes no sense for the Bulls to sign him long-term when he's going to be 31 years old next season. And if the Bulls do pick up a couple bigs via the draft, there's just no spot for him in the rotation anyway, as the Bulls should be prioritizing the development of those rookies above Yabusele. So I'm saying it's a 0% chance that Yabusele comes back. And then for Nick Richards, the same kind of thing applies. The only thing I'll say about Richards is that it was a welcoming sight to see an actual rim-running lob threat guy in the pick and roll next to Josh Giddey. The Bulls have just never had that, and even though Richards is not the guy you really build with, and likely won't be in the league that much longer, but if the Bulls, for whatever reason, draft a couple guards and are still void of a center, or just in general, front court depth, yeah, sure, there is a world where they could look to try and bring Richards back on a minimum deal. But at that point, you'd have to think they'll just opt to sign Zach Collins instead, even if he's a bit more expensive. So I'm giving it a 5% chance that Nick Richards stays with the team. I'm not going to do the two-way guys, as those roles are always kind of up in the air, and I also don't really see a scenario where the Bulls would actually sign them to a full-time guaranteed contract, but I would be fine seeing all of them come back on two-way deals, especially Yuki, because he's so much fun to watch. But anyway, those are my predictions as far as who I think will and will not be coming back next season, but I'd love to hear what you guys think, though. You guys let me know in the comments whether you agree or disagree. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.